What's up, everyone? So today I want to read a little bit from a book called Poor Charlie's Almanack. I think it is one of the most amazing books out there on life advice, on succeeding, on accumulating more wealth, on getting richer, earning more money, life advice, how you should treat others, how you should go about your day, things you should do, family advice, how you should raise people, how you should treat others, and things that you forget to take into account in terms of social skills, persuasion, on and on and on and on. So this is a exceptionally fascinating book, and I just want to talk about one specific concept in it that I think is just very fascinating. I think it will be very useful for you, whoever the heck you are out there watching this video. So I think this is very fascinating because I for sure did not really factor this in as much as I should in my past. And what's said in this particular chapter of this book, it's very fascinating book. He talks about, and if you guys don't know who Charlie Munger is, he is a billionaire and he's the partner to Warren Buffett, who is second richest person in the United States right now, and he used to be the first richest before Bill took his spot. But long story short, let's continue with what's being said here. So he talks about this thing called a self-serving bias. It's basically how most humans are just naturally, they have a natural tendency to serve themselves, a selfishness in them. And he says one important thing to know is that you can start eliminating this in yourself, but you have to take into account the fact that other people have this self-serving bias, and some of them, most of them, have not eliminated this bias from their own bodies, and they're still maybe very selfish or self-motivated or motivated by incentives. And so what this means is that you have to really take things into account when you're talking to people, and you have to realize that not all people are just really black and white logical thinkers and they're going to do everything right and wrong. And this branches off into other topics because I mean it applies to a lot of areas, but for this particular video, what Mr. Munger talks about is the fact that specifically there are people who, for lack of a better word, only really function on a certain level by incentives. So you can tell them, you can explain to them, you can reason to them, okay, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. And unfortunately, they're motivated by incentives, or it's just not going to work. And he illustrates with a great story in his own business life, a very well-known story if you're familiar with his company, Berkshire Hathaway, that even people who are seemingly very smart, accomplished business people who don't seem to be really motivated too much by incentives and that sort of stuff, and are more seemingly in line with reason and logic and explanations and evidence, they can sometimes, if things aren't really clearly set forth, do the wrong thing or push things off, which can lead to catastrophic results in the long run. So this all seems kind of abstract. What the heck are you talking about? So Berkshire Hathaway is this huge company. It's bought a partial ownership of this investment bank called Salomon Brothers. Now, this is a huge company, lots of money flowing through. And a few years back, it fell into a scandal. This one employee, he was kind of high up, did something he shouldn't have. And he told his bosses, one of the bosses being the CEO, and they talked about it and they concluded this is not the right thing to do. You know, it's not legal it's not our legal duty to report this, but I think it's what we should do. We should definitely report this. It's our moral duty to report this. So they were all good and stuff. I mean, at least so far. And this was a company that was judged by Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and they were assessed. They're probably assessed on one of the key principles that they do to assess companies that they buy in ownership to, which is, okay, you gotta have a hugely amazing, honest, loyal, trustworthy team of managers and employees and executives. So, so far so good, right? And Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they bought into this company thinking, and they're very well known for assessing and researching these people to make sure that they're honest and trustworthy and all this stuff. So all seems fairly good. And then weeks, months pass and no one does anything. They put it off. Why? Because they did something that was not the right thing to do. It wasn't illegal, but it was sketchy. And they could have done it, but they didn't want to because it doesn't look good. Everyone falls into that trap. I've seen it in my own life. If you're in high school or middle school, or you're just working a job, even if it's a low-class job, flipping burgers at McDonald's, you can fall into this situation where it's like perhaps you stole something, or perhaps you just not by no fault of your own, you weren't meaning to do something bad, but you did something and it ended up kind of sketchy. Perhaps you thought that you could take this and you didn't know it was stealing because you thought there was like leftover French fries, and then you stole a lot of them. Okay, that's kind of trivial, but okay, maybe something more, like you took some merchandise out and you shouldn't have. Whatever it is, you can fall into the same situation. And so what's the point of all this? Long story short, this led to catastrophic a huge catastrophic crash of this company. The regulators stepped in, SEC stepped in. Horrendous, the reputations of the management, CEOs, it was all lost, and it was a horrendously embarrassing thing. And then they resigned, and then it was horrible. So basically what Munger's saying here is that this is an illustration of what can happen. And so what he's saying here is that you could have just appealed to something else. And what he recommends, what he points out is, think smart. Some people, it's not always best to just go by reason. And this is something I'm working on, because I think men generally are very logical people, me especially. And so you think you can just talk to everyone, or most people, and just like convince everyone or explain everything logically. But that's not how the world works at all. And so you have to use some other stuff sometimes. People are emotional. People are following their own incentives and their own selfish desires, and they're drawn towards things that please them and satisfy them, and away from things that repel them or make them do unnecessary work because they're lazy and so forth. So kind of like how Casanova was, he was this socially intelligent chameleon. He understood, like, you can't just go around very robotically and just be like very logical about everything. And so what Mr. Munger says here is, he says, do like Ben Franklin said to do. And he says, use Ben Franklin's persuasive techniques in situations like this. If you would persuade, appeal to interest, not reason. And this is something I am not the best at. I'm working on. I think, especially nowadays, you think that everyone's like, with all this advancement in technology and so forth and education, you're thinking that people are like so much better, and they are in certain ways. But at the end of the day, everyone's not that great. They're not like complete logical beings. There's always emotion and other stuff going on. So, Mr. Munger, he says, the self-serving bias of man is extreme, keyword extreme, and should have been used in attaining the correct outcome. So the general counsel should have said, look, this is likely to erupt into something that would destroy you, take away your money, take away your status, and grossly impair your reputation. So rather than saying what was said, which is, we don't have to legally do this, but it would be the right thing to do. And then they put it off and they don't do it, and then like everyone agrees this is the right thing to do, and no one really wants to do it because it's like embarrassing, and it kind of slightly tarnishes their reputation and so forth. Instead, Mr. Munger, Charlie, he's saying, instead that man should have been like, okay, we have to say this, we have to let this be known to the regulators immediately, because if something happens and this doesn't get out, and we just pussyfoot around and nothing gets done, then the regulators are going, if they even sniff a little whiff of something off, and they start investigating, and then they find out that we didn't tell them about this thing, and then it gets blown out of proportion, we could lose our money, our jobs, our reputation. The company can go to tank, and all this sort of stuff. And that's what happened. SEC stepped in. They started investigating. They looked at everything. They tore out everything. They investigated all the paperwork, and the company's stock just plummeted, and on and on and on. I'm not expert about the story. That's pretty much all I know. So it's something to consider. And again, I'm sort of applying it to other situations, which I definitely think is true. There are definitely situations where I, for many instances, have maybe given more respect or assumed much more than I should that this person is very logical and reasonable and rational, and they function on this level. And people are not this way, and I'm still working on it. They're very emotional sometimes. Sometimes they're very, just naturally human. It's just being human. They're motivated by certain selfish incentives, whether it's just they're lazy and they don't want to do this, or they like certain things, whether it's food, whether it's money, whether it's the new iPhone, or whatever reason they are like that. So let me know in the comments what you think about this. Have you had a similar situation like this? Or do you have any personal feedback or advice you want to give based off these situations? And what I'm talking about is, have you ever had one of those situations where you may have assumed certain things, and it turns out no, it would have been much better if I just been a little more savvy socially and realized, okay, rather than coming in with this logical debate and arguing with this person, you could have just had more fun by being illogical, but adding some humor and just joking around rather than being so serious. Let me know if you've had any stories like that, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe. See you guys later.